Imagine standing completely alone on a battlefield. No backup, no way to call for help, surrounded by danger on every side. Military experts would later examine the situation and reach the same conclusion. The chances of survival were almost zero. Yet somehow one soldier would live through it all. His incredible journey would become one of the most remarkable survival stories ever told. Before the story was over, this soldier would face overwhelming enemy forces, devastating injuries, and complete isolation. Every advantage seemed to belong to the enemy. Every obstacle stood in his path. Looking back, it is difficult to understand how anyone could survive such conditions. But sometimes, determination can achieve what logic says is impossible. Long before the battlefield, he lived an ordinary life. He had dreams, goals, and plans for the future. Friends and family knew him as a normal young man, not someone destined for history books. He enjoyed simple moments, worried about everyday problems, and never imagined that one day his courage would be tested in the most extreme way possible. As he grew older, he felt a strong desire to serve something greater than himself. He admired those who wore the uniform before him and respected the values of duty, discipline, and sacrifice. Eventually, he made a life-changing decision. He enlisted in the military, beginning a journey that would lead him toward challenges he could never have imagined. Military training was far more demanding than he expected. Every day brought new obstacles. Long runs, difficult exercises, and relentless discipline pushed recruits to their limits. Instructors demanded excellence and accepted no excuses. The goal was simple: transform ordinary young men into soldiers capable of performing under the most intense pressure imaginable. Training tested both body and mind. Heavy equipment made every mile more difficult. Exhaustion became part of daily life. Many recruits struggled with the constant demands. Some even quit. But he kept moving forward. Every challenge made him stronger, preparing him for a future battle that would eventually test every skill he possessed. One of the most important lessons he learned was the value of teamwork. Soldiers depended on each other for support, protection, and survival. Strong friendships formed during difficult days and long nights. Those bonds created trust that could not be broken easily. On the battlefield, that trust would become one of the most important weapons a soldier could possess. Eventually, training ended and deployment began. Like many soldiers before him, he experienced a mixture of pride, excitement, and uncertainty. Saying goodbye to family and friends was not easy. Everyone understood the risks, even if they never spoke about them openly. Soon, he was leaving home behind and heading toward an active conflict zone. The environment that greeted him was harsh and unforgiving. Dust covered the landscape. Rugged mountains stretched across the horizon. Temperatures were extreme, and danger could appear without warning. This was a place where every road carried risk, and every mission demanded caution. The realities of war were now very real. The region had earned a dangerous reputation. Enemy fighters knew the terrain better than anyone. They understood every trail, every valley, and every hidden position. They could attack quickly and disappear just as fast. For soldiers operating here, uncertainty became a constant companion, following them wherever they went. Patrols required complete focus. Soldiers carefully watched the surrounding hills and searched for signs of danger. Experience taught them that threats often appeared when least expected. Even during quiet moments, nobody truly relaxed. Staying alert could mean the difference between returning safely or becoming the next target of an unseen enemy. Then came a mission that seemed routine. The objective was straightforward: move through a remote area, gather information, monitor activity, and return safely. Equipment was checked, weapons were inspected, radios were tested. Everything appeared normal. None of the soldiers suspected that this mission would soon change their lives forever. As the convoy moved deeper into the mountains, the terrain became increasingly isolated. Roads narrowed and visibility decreased. Steep hills surrounded the vehicles on both sides. Some soldiers noticed a strange feeling in the air. Nothing looked obviously wrong, yet something about the environment felt unusually tense and unsettling. Hidden among the rocks and ridges, enemy fighters were already observing the convoy. Patient and silent, they watched every movement below. They had chosen their positions carefully and understood exactly where they wanted the attack to happen. The soldiers continued forward, completely unaware that they were being watched. With every mile, the convoy moved closer to danger. Beyond the surrounding hills, enemy forces were preparing to strike. The trap was nearly ready. Within a matter of hours, gunfire would erupt, communication would fail, and chaos would consume the battlefield. What began as a routine mission was about to become a desperate fight for survival. The convoy continued moving deeper into the mountains. Dust rose behind the vehicles as they followed the narrow road winding through the valley. The soldiers remained alert, carefully watching the hills and rocky ridges around them. Everything appeared quiet. Yet, hidden beyond their sight, enemy fighters were already in position. A carefully planned trap was waiting ahead, and the soldiers were driving straight toward it. Without warning, a massive explosion shattered the silence. The lead vehicle was engulfed in fire and debris as the blast echoed through the mountains. For a split second, shock and confusion spread through the convoy. Nobody knew exactly what had happened. Then reality struck. This was not an accident. The soldiers had just entered a deadly ambush. Almost immediately, gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Bullets tore through the air as enemy fighters opened fire from the surrounding hills. Tracer rounds streaked across the valley. The attack was intense and well coordinated. The soldiers found themselves under fire from positions they could barely see. The quiet mountain road had suddenly become a battlefield. Training took over as soldiers rushed for cover and returned fire. Explosions shook the ground while commands were shouted over the noise. Smoke filled the air and visibility rapidly disappeared. The battlefield became a maze of confusion and danger. Every soldier focused on survival, knowing that a single mistake could cost lives in the middle of the chaos. Amid the violence, the soldier at the center of our story fought alongside his unit. Adrenaline surged through his body as he fired toward enemy positions and moved between cover. Fear was present, but there was no time to think about it. Every second mattered. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. The enemy had chosen their positions carefully. Hidden among the elevated ridges, they controlled the battlefield from above. From those heights, they could observe almost everything below. The soldiers struggled to identify where the attacks were coming from. Every time they focused on one threat, another appeared from a different direction. As the battle intensified, communication became increasingly difficult. Radio operators desperately attempted to coordinate a response and call for support. Messages were interrupted. Signals became weak. Important information failed to reach its destination. The soldiers needed help, but in the middle of the ambush, maintaining communication was becoming nearly impossible. Then another explosion struck nearby. The force of the blast threw the soldier to the ground. Dust and debris filled the air as his vision blurred, and his ears rang. For a moment, everything seemed distant and unclear. The battlefield around him disappeared behind a cloud of smoke and confusion. As he regained his senses, he looked around desperately. Thick smoke covered the battlefield. Shapes moved through the haze, but nothing was clear. Gunfire echoed from different directions. The men he had been fighting beside were nowhere to be seen. For the first time, he realized that he might be completely separated from his unit. He searched for familiar faces and listened for friendly voices, but found nothing. The battlefield had changed completely. Smoke, dust, and confusion had isolated him from the rest of the force. A terrifying realization slowly settled in. He was alone. Surrounded by danger, cut off from support, and deep inside hostile territory. Hoping to reconnect with his unit, he reached for his radio. He tried calling for help. No response. He tried again. Still nothing. Whether damaged by the battle or unable to reach friendly forces, the result was the same. The radio remained silent. The lifeline connecting him to his fellow soldiers had been severed. The danger grew even greater when enemy fighters began moving through the terrain. They were no longer attacking from a distance. They were searching the area looking for isolated survivors. Carefully navigating the rocky landscape, they moved closer with every passing minute. If they discovered him alone, his chances of survival would be almost non-existent. The soldier knew he could not stay where he was. Injured and exhausted, he began moving through the rugged mountains. Every step brought pain. Every movement required effort. Yet, he continued forward. Stopping was not an option. Survival depended on finding safety while avoiding enemy patrols that were still searching the region. As the day slowly came to an end, long shadows stretched across the mountains. The sun dropped lower toward the horizon, and darkness began creeping across the landscape. Night would make navigation more difficult and allow enemy patrols to move unseen. Time was running out, and the soldier needed shelter before darkness completely arrived. Finally, he found a concealed position among large rocks overlooking a narrow valley. There he stopped for the first time in hours. His body ached from injuries and exhaustion. His radio was dead. His unit was gone. And somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness, enemy fighters were still searching. The battle was over, but his fight for survival was only beginning.
Night settled over the mountains as darkness slowly swallowed the landscape. Hidden among the rocks, the wounded soldier remained completely still. The battle was over, but the danger had not disappeared. He was alone, injured, and deep inside hostile territory. Somewhere beyond the darkness, enemy patrols were still searching. Survival now depended on patience, silence, and avoiding even the smallest mistake. Shifting rock, a distant voice, or the faint crunch of footsteps could mean danger was close. He remained alert, knowing that a single every sound seemed important. The soldier listened carefully to the darkness around him. A careless movement might reveal his position. In the silence of the mountains, fear became as real as any enemy soldier. The cold night air made his injuries even harder to ignore. Pain spread through his body with every passing hour. His muscles ached, and exhaustion weighed heavily on him. Finding a comfortable position was impossible. Yet despite the discomfort, he forced himself to stay quiet. The enemy was still out there, and survival depended on remaining hidden.
Sleep never came. Fear, uncertainty, and pain kept him awake through the long night. His mind filled with questions that had no answers. Had anyone survived the ambush? Was anyone searching for him? Did his unit know he was alive? The darkness offered only silence. Alone with his thoughts, the soldier waited for morning. Eventually, the first signs of dawn appeared beyond the mountains. A faint glow spread across the horizon, ending the longest night of his life. He had survived until morning. It was a small victory, but an important one. Every hour he remained alive proved that survival was still possible, even under impossible circumstances. As daylight returned, the soldier carefully examined his condition. Cuts, bruises, and battlefield injuries covered his body. Every movement brought pain. Without proper medical treatment, even minor wounds could become serious problems. He understood the danger. Infection, exhaustion, and dehydration were becoming threats almost as dangerous as the enemy itself. Next, he checked the supplies he had left. The results were discouraging. Food was limited, water was running low, medical supplies were nearly gone. Everything he needed to survive was disappearing faster than he had hoped. The reality was impossible to ignore. He could not remain hidden forever. Eventually, he would have to move. Knowing he could not stay in one place, the soldier began moving through the rugged mountains. Every step demanded caution. He avoided open areas and stayed close to natural cover whenever possible. His injuries slowed him down, but stopping was not an option. Survival required action, even when every movement brought pain. The mountains seemed endless. Ridge after ridge stretched across the horizon, with no sign of rescue anywhere in sight. The vast wilderness made him feel smaller and more isolated than ever before. There were no friendly voices, no radio calls, and no indication that help was nearby. Only silence and uncertainty surrounded him. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the heat became relentless. His throat felt dry, and his energy continued to fade. Exhaustion weighed heavily on every step. The combination of injuries, dehydration, and difficult terrain pushed him closer to his limits. Yet somehow, he continued moving forward one step at a time. When the physical struggle became overwhelming, his thoughts turned toward home. He remembered family members waiting for his return. He thought about friends who believed in him. Those memories became a source of strength. He was no longer fighting only for survival. He was fighting for the chance to see the people he loved again. The mountains created new challenges at every turn. Steep slopes and loose rocks made travel dangerous. Several times, he nearly lost his footing while crossing difficult terrain. A serious fall could leave him unable to continue. Every movement required concentration. Every decision carried consequences. Even nature seemed determined to test his will to survive.
Then came another frightening reminder of the danger surrounding him. In the distance, he spotted movement. Enemy patrols were searching the area. Their presence confirmed what he already feared. The enemy had not given up. They were still looking for survivors, still moving through the mountains, and still capable of ending his struggle at any moment. The soldier immediately dropped behind cover and remained perfectly still. The patrol moved closer with every passing minute. His heart pounded as he watched them search nearby terrain. Discovery would almost certainly mean death. He controlled his breathing and waited silently. Eventually, the patrol moved on, unaware of how close they had come. As evening approached, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him once again. Then something unusual caught his attention in the distance. Far beyond the mountains, he noticed an unfamiliar shape. He couldn't tell if it was a vehicle, a structure, or something else entirely. But for the first time since becoming stranded, he saw a possible sign of hope, and reaching it might be his only chance for survival. As darkness settled over the mountains once again, the soldier could not stop thinking about the distant shape he had seen beyond the ridges. For days, the wilderness had offered nothing but danger, isolation, and uncertainty. Now there was something different. a possibility, a chance that help might exist somewhere beyond the horizon. But if he wanted answers, he would have to reach it himself.
Before sunrise the next morning, he began moving. The air was cold and every muscle in his body ached from exhaustion. His injuries had grown worse with each passing day. Even standing required effort. Yet he forced himself forward. Step by step, he focused on the distant object. It had become his only goal and his only reason to keep moving. The terrain quickly became more difficult. Steep slopes and loose rocks challenged every step he took. Pain shot through his injured body whenever he stumbled or lost his balance. His legs felt weak, and fatigue weighed heavily on him. But after everything he had already survived, he refused to stop. Determination continued carrying him forward. The mountains seemed determined to test him one final time. Rocky ridges blocked his path, forcing him to take longer routes through difficult terrain. Every obstacle consumed valuable energy. Every climb felt harder than the last. Yet despite the challenges, he continued moving toward the distant location that represented his only hope for survival. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the heat returned. His remaining water was almost gone, and dehydration was beginning to affect his concentration. Every breath felt heavier. Every step demanded more effort. At times, he wondered whether his body could continue. But even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he refused to quit. Around midday, he reached the top of a rocky ridge and finally saw the distant object more clearly. What he discovered immediately changed everything. It appeared to be a small outpost far beyond the mountains. It was not an enemy position. It was not a trap. For the first time since the ambush, real hope surged through him. Seeing the outpost filled him with renewed determination. Survival no longer felt like an impossible dream. If friendly forces occupied that location, safety might finally be within reach. The distance remained great, and his body remained weak, but hope gave him something powerful. It gave him a reason to keep fighting through the pain. The next stage of the journey became the most difficult. His legs trembled with exhaustion, and every step felt heavier than the one before. Deep ravines and rocky slopes slowed his progress. Several times he stopped briefly to rest, yet each time he forced himself back to his feet. The goal was now too close to abandon. By late afternoon, his body was approaching its limit. His vision occasionally blurred, and his concentration became harder to maintain. Exhaustion, dehydration, and injuries combined into a powerful challenge. Every muscle in his body demanded rest. Yet through the pain, one thought remained constant. Keep moving. Keep moving. Keep moving. Then something unexpected caught his attention. In the distance, several figures were moving across the landscape. Instantly, fear returned. His first thought was that they might be enemy patrols. He lowered himself and watched carefully. The uncertainty was overwhelming. Everything depended on who those figures turned out to be. As he continued watching, he noticed something different. Their movements looked familiar. Their uniforms looked familiar. Slowly, realization replaced fear. These were not enemy fighters. They were friendly soldiers. After days of isolation behind enemy lines, he had finally found help. Or perhaps help had finally found him. The soldier attempted to stand and signal the approaching troops. He wanted to call out, wave, or do anything to attract their attention. But his body had almost nothing left to give. He staggered forward and tried to raise an arm. Then, the world around him began to spin as exhaustion finally caught up with him. Before losing consciousness, he heard voices. Friendly voices. The rescue team had spotted him and was moving quickly toward his position. Moments later, soldiers and medics reached him. Water was provided. His injuries were examined. Emergency treatment began immediately. For the first time since the ambush, he was no longer facing the struggle alone. Medical personnel quickly prepared him for evacuation. The rescue operation moved with urgency as a helicopter arrived to carry him away from the mountains. Days of fear, uncertainty, and survival were finally coming to an end. The nightmare that had begun with the ambush was over. Safety was now within reach. In the weeks and months that followed, recovery would take time. But the most important battle had already been won. Against overwhelming odds, he survived. His story became a powerful reminder that survival is not always about strength. Sometimes it is about refusing to quit. One more step, one more hour, one more day. Against all expectations, he survived. As the helicopter lifted away from the mountains, the landscape that had nearly claimed his life slowly disappeared below. For days, those rugged peaks had been a place of fear, uncertainty, and survival. Now, they were fading into the distance. For the first time since the ambush, the soldier was no longer fighting to stay alive. He was finally heading towards safety. When he arrived at a military medical facility, doctors and medics immediately began treatment. His body showed the effects of everything he had endured: dehydration, exhaustion, injuries, and days of exposure to harsh conditions had taken a heavy toll. Medical personnel worked quickly, knowing that every moment mattered as they fought to stabilize his condition. The first days after his rescue were difficult. Recovery would not happen overnight. His injuries required constant care, and his body needed time to heal. Even simple movements could be painful. Yet despite the challenges ahead, one thing was certain. He had survived an ordeal that many believed nobody could endure. As the days passed, the long road to recovery began. Physical therapy and rehabilitation tested him in new ways. Progress came slowly. Some days felt harder than others. But the determination that carried him through the mountains now helped him rebuild his strength. Once again, he faced each challenge one step at a time. This time, however, he was not alone. Fellow soldiers visited and offered encouragement. Friends and military personnel stood beside him throughout the recovery process. The same spirit of teamwork that exists on the battlefield now helped him heal. Their support reminded him that survival is rarely a journey completed alone. While he recovered, his family finally received the news they had been hoping for. Days earlier, uncertainty had dominated every moment of their lives. They had waited for updates, feared the worst, and prayed for answers. Now they knew the truth. Against all odds, the soldier they loved was alive. The reunion that followed was emotional beyond words. After everything he had endured, he was finally surrounded by the people who mattered most. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted everyone for days gave way to relief and gratitude. It was a moment that nobody present would ever forget. Although he was finally safe, the experience stayed with him. The ambush, the isolation, the fear, and the long days spent alone in the mountains became memories that would never fully disappear. Survival changes people. The challenges he faced behind enemy lines became part of his story and part of who he had become. Looking back, he understood something important. Survival is not only a physical challenge, it is also a mental one. The decision to keep going when everything hurts. The refusal to surrender when hope seems distant. Those choices carried him through the darkest moments and ultimately helped him stay alive. As news of the ordeal spread, military personnel began examining exactly what had happened. They reviewed the distance he traveled, the injuries he endured, and the conditions he survived. The findings were remarkable. Few people believed anyone could overcome so many obstacles and still emerge alive. The harsh terrain, limited supplies, enemy presence, and physical injuries all combined to create extraordinary challenges. Any one of those factors could have ended the story differently. Together, they represented odds that seemed nearly impossible to overcome. Yet somehow, through determination and resilience, he found a way to survive. Over time, his experience became more than a survival story. It became a lesson in perseverance. Many people were inspired by what he endured and how he responded to adversity. His journey demonstrated that courage is not about being fearless. It is about continuing forward despite fear and uncertainty. His story revealed something powerful about human nature. People are often capable of far more than they realize. When challenges appear impossible, strength can emerge from unexpected places. The soldier discovered that strength in the mountains, and it carried him through circumstances that few believed anyone could survive. Years later, the legacy of his survival continued to inspire others. Not because he possessed extraordinary powers, but because he demonstrated extraordinary determination. His experience became a reminder that persistence matters. Hope matters. And sometimes, the simple decision to keep moving forward can change everything. The soldier entered the mountains facing impossible odds. He emerged carrying something far greater than survival. He carried proof that resilience can overcome fear, that determination can outlast hardship, and that hope can survive even in the darkest moments. Against all expectations, against all predictions, and against impossible odds, he survived.